Hello and welcome to lesson 1 of week 7. This week we are going to look at HTML forms. My name is Mildred. In this lesson we are going to look at how to create a form to collect data from users using HTML. In HTML, to create a form on a page, we use the form tag. The form tag by itself does nothing on the page. We will need to put in attributes in the start form tag, and then between the start and the end form tag, other form elements comes in. The form element we are going to use depends on the type of data we want to collect. We have several form elements, and the first form element we are going to look at is the input element, which is the largest and the most used element. Before we get into designing the form, whenever we are designing a web page, we have to keep in mind those with disabilities, and we have to design the form so that the screen readers can properly read this form. And to do that, we want to use the label tag to label the form field. What we do with the label is to create a label for the field, or that states what the user is to enter into the input field we are going to create below it. The label has 4 attributes, which will take a name that will be used with the ID attributes on the input field to bind the label to the input. When we have a label, for now I will use a break tag until we style this form. We can now use the input field. The input element is a void element. It takes attributes. The first attribute we'll put is the ID, whose value must match the value of the 4 attributes for the label to bind them together. Then it must have a name attribute, which names this field, so that when we start processing this data or to store this data in the database, we use the name to get the value that the user enters. So I'm still going to use first name. Always make sure that the names you use are meaningful so that it is easy for you to always locate that input field or to reference the input field. So the input field will have the ID attribute, the name attribute, and then the type attribute. Now, there are several types of input, and the type you specify is going to create the type of input. So if you specify text, it's going to give you a text field where the user can type text. We have several types that gives options and dates and others. So we want to use text, which is the default. And when I save this and I refresh my web page, we are going to have a form, first name, and where we can type in the first name for this. Now, take note that we have not styled this form yet. We are going to just focus on building a form, and then we're going to style it later on to make it look beautiful or presentable. Now, these are the basic attributes it takes. There are more attributes that the input field take to enforce different constraints on the field. You can put a required attribute, which makes it required so that the user must fill that field before they can submit the form. We're going to look at all the other attributes in a later lesson, but for now let's focus on these 3. I am going to use a break tag for all of this to start a new line. I want to copy this and I want to create the next field, and this is going to be for, let's say, middle name or other names. Save, refresh my page, and I have first name, other names, and I want to also do the same thing for last name. So copy and paste can make you forget to change some values, so it's always better to type, but to make this fast, I am copying and pasting. So we have first, middle, and last name, and we have illustrated how to use the type text. Now, before you registered for this course, your age was verified by your ID. And the reason for that is that some of the case study we are going to use might not be child appropriate. And so to better illustrate the different types of fields, we are going to try to design a form, a case reporting form for sexual and reproductive health. And so this is one of the reasons why children were not really allowed to enroll in this course, because some content might not be age appropriate. So going forward, we are going to be using case studies that are hospital based, and they are all going to be case studies from sexual and reproductive health. We are going to design a form in this illustration that is going to collect a case report, basic information for a patient, and that way we can see all the different types of input field and how to design domain specific forms that we will need going forward. So we've collected the first name, middle name, last name, and the type of the input field is text. We want to see how to collect a password. Always remember that you want to use the label tag always. This is for accessibility. Anytime you design a web page, you want to make sure that you cover all the rules for both accessibility and for standard practice. So you always want to review documentations that exist and the rules that you want to stick to make sure that your system is friendly for all types of users. So I want to put the label for, and I want this to be unique identifier, and I'm going to write unique ID as what I want the users to see, and I'm going to close label. I will break, and I will put an input field. So the input type here is equal to, now because I want this to be maxed when the user is typing just like a password, I'm going to use the type of password rather than text. So this way, once the user starts typing into the field, it is going to be maxed. I remember to put my ID is equal to unique ID, and my name is equal to unique ID. Your name and your ID mustn't match. I'm just doing this to make it easy to reference this field when we start form processing. So I'm going to save this, refresh my page, and let's try to type into the fields that we have created. So let's say the first name here is Mildred. The other names here, I'll use my name and the last name here, and the unique ID. Now when you start typing into this field, you'll see that everything is maxed, and so nobody can see what you type in. And so that's the use of the type of password for an input field. We have seen two types of input, the text and the password. We are going to look at a third type of input, which is like the date type. So let's put label for, I want to use like date of birth. So I'll put DOB and I'll put date of birth and close label. And then I'm going to come here and put the input type is equal to date. ID is equal to DOB, and the name is equal to DOB. Save, refresh my web page, and I have date of birth. So now is the time where you have to also make sure that when you develop, you look at browser compatibility. Most of the time you want to develop your web page so that it is compatible with the 5 major browsers, which are Apple Safari, Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, Internet Explorer, and Opera. If you design so that a particular field is not compatible with a particular browser, you have to let the users know what browser to use to access your web page, as it is not compatible with other browsers. But standard practice is you want to try to make sure that your web page is compatible with all 5 major browsers, and this is a time where you want to install all browsers on your system so you can test your web page across the browsers. The way Apple Safari is going to display the date type is different from how Google would display, how Firefox would display, but you want to make sure again that your browser is the most recent version of your browser, because older versions are not compatible with some of these tags, but later versions are compatible with this tag. And when we get to part 2 of this course, we are going to see how we can write the same code twice to cover all compatibility for the different browsers. So we have done the date type and we've seen how it looks. We want to do another type of input field, which is the option button. So we want the user to select one of several options. So let's put another field called, let's say, the sex of the user. So I'm going to close label, break, and then I'll come here and put input type is equal to, so the type for option is radio. The name is going to be sex. Now, this one must have a value attribute, and the value is the value that will be submitted when this option is clicked. So let's say the value here is female, and we want the users to see female here. I'll break. I'll put the next option. So for option buttons, you want to make sure that the name for all of them are the same, just the value that changes. And the next is so we'll save this, refresh our web page, and see how it is displayed. So we have the text type, we have the password type, we have the date type, we have the option type where the user can only select one of several options. If we want the user to be able to select more than one option, we have another type of input that we can use, and I'm going to use this to illustrate, let's say, types of sexual activities. Label for sex activity. And we'll have input type. Now the type here is going to be equal to checkbox. The value here will be the value you want to submit to the database when this option is selected. The name here is going to be equal to, let's say, sex activity. And then we'll put an ID here to be equal to sex activity. Now the thing with ID attribute is that ID is unique. You can't use ID for more than one field. So every time you are using an ID attribute, you know that it's only going to apply to one. So I'm going to add an ID to these ones, which I missed out. So let's put ID equal to sex. And here ID is equal to I will copy this to be fast. So the value here, we want the system to save if the user selects this option. Let's say oral, and I'll put oral here so the user can see that option. Anal, and I'll put anal here, and vaginal. Save this, refresh our web page, and we're going to see options where we can select more than one option. So we use the type of checkbox to do this. We also have another type of input, which is the number type, and we're going to illustrate this. So let's say label for number partner, and so let's write number of sexual partners. Close label. Input type equal to number. Name is equal to number partner. ID is equal to number partner. And then I'm going to use a break tag to make all of this more presentable. I'll save this, refresh my web page. So we're going to try to enter values into the field. Let's say this is Jane, other names, Anna, last name, Doe, unique ID, enter any value. Let's say Jane Doe was born on, is female, type of sexual activity, let's say anal, vaginal, number of sexual partner, 5. So this only gives you option for numbers, but for Apple Safari you'll see that it allows you to type this, and maybe the constraint is enforced when you try to submit the page, and this is where you look at the compatibilities of different browsers with different types of input field. But when you try to select automatically, it only gives you number options. We also have another type of input field, which is, let's say we want to take like telephone number, and this again might have compatibility issues across browsers, but we're going to try to use them. So I want this to be label for tel. We're going to change this to tel. Type is tel. Name is, let's give it the name tel. The ID is tel. Save, refresh our web page. We have for tel. So if I put in for Safari, you see it takes the values, but this is for telephone numbers. So if we go back to our file and we try to open this with Google Chrome to see how it displays. So we have the form, and we can see that with Google Chrome it is a totally different way this displays. You can always select, and the selection is easier. The form looks different from how it looks with the Apple Safari, and the numbers are enforced, and you can type in fields that will be accepted. So once it's number, it has to be a number. When you try to type in text, it doesn't allow. When you're putting a telephone number for all of them, input type tel, it still takes in letters for both. And so this is where you always test across the 5 major browsers and see if your form displays properly, and then you can give the users warning on what browser they will get a best user experience with. So you want to make sure that at the very least the 5 major browsers, and if not, you want to make sure that your system is compatible with Apple Safari, Google Chrome, and Internet Explorer. And if it is compatible with these 3, you can always recommend to users what browsers to use to get the best effect for, or the best user experience. So we have looked at these input types. There are still several more input types we are going to look at. Let's try to put a reset and a submit button here, and then we are going to look at other input types. And so we are going to put an input type. Let's use a reset type, so that when the user enters values in the field, and instead of deleting the values, they want to just click on the reset button to clear all the values that have been entered into all the fields. So put an input type reset, and the name will be reset. We want to put another input type. So let's say input type submit, right? The value that will be on the submit button will be submit. And then we can put other things like the style we want the submit button to have. So I'll save this and refresh the page so that we can see what we have. So we'll have a reset button and we'll have a submit button. The submit button is what will send this form data for processing to a processing page, and we're going to look at how to process information collected in course 2, but this course is all about the design of the web page. And so when you click on reset, let's say I enter values here, and the unique ID, and I feel like I want to change all the values, I'll click on reset and it clears everything. When I click on submit, it is going to submit this, and for you to click on the submit button, there are attributes that has to go in the form, start form tag, like the action, the processing page, the method of submission. We are going to look at that in a later lesson, but for now we're just going to look at the type of input field that we have. So we are going to take a break, and when we come back, we are going to enhance this form design, and we are going to go back to the beginning of the form element that we have created. Welcome back. So we have created, before the break, the form. We use a label to label each of the fields for accessibility. We have said that we use the 4 attributes and specify a value that must be equal to the value of the ID attribute of the input field. We saw the input type text, the input type password, the input type radio, checkbox. We saw the input type number, tail. We'll look at the reset and the submit. Now let's go back to the input type radio. An ID attribute is unique and it only applies to one element on the page. We put label for sex, which means that the ID is going to bind to just one of these input field. What we can do is to put something like, I'm going to delete this. So when you design your form, you can come back to change the design. So I'll change this to, let's put the label here. Let's say label 4, and we want this to be for the female option. And then I'm going to put female, and then I'll close label, and then I'll come back to the ID here and bind this to the female. I'll remove this. I'll remove the break tag. I will save. Let's refresh our page to see if the female option presents properly before we go further. So we have the female option well presented. And so we'll go back and do the same thing for the male option. I'm going to put a label for the male. So the ID here will be male. The label here is male. And I'll take this and the break tag out. I'll do the same thing for intersex. the ID here is intersex, label for intersex, the label here is intersex. So you see we started easy and then we go back to correct and do things properly. So I'm going to do the same thing for the checkbox so that we can properly bind the labels to each of the options. So I'll take this label out, and then I can actually have a label here that has no binding to any of these elements, and I will just put the label as, let's say, sex, so that the users will know what it is they're selecting the options for. Then I'll do that here, and I'll put close label. Then I'm going to put a label beneath each of these. So this will be label for, so the first option is oral. Oral. The ID now will change to oral, and I'm going to remove this. I'll move this, change this ID to anal, put a new label here for anal, change the label to anal. I'll also change this one to vaginal. I'm going to delete this, and then I'm going to put a new label here for vaginal, and then I'll break here. So let's refresh our page to see if all is well. So we have the sex, we have the types of sexual activities, and then we have number of sexual partners, the telephone number. We can also put a regular expression for telephone number that is going to make this telephone accept a particular pattern, and we use the pattern attributes for that. Let's say I want to use a particular number pattern for a phone number of a particular region. So let's say this form we are designing is going to be a form filled by people in a particular country whose phone pattern is fixed or specified. So let's say we have a pattern that has something like 4 numbers including the area or country code, and then we have another set of 3 numbers and then another set of 4 numbers. We specify the regular expression like this. We want it to accept a number from 0 to 9, and we want it to be 4 numbers. Then we want it to put a hyphen like this, accept another group of numbers from 0 to 9, and we want it to be 3 numbers. And then we put a hyphen, and we also want it to accept the last set of number from 0 to 9, and we want it to be 4 numbers. Like this. Let's save and see if this is correct. We're going to refresh our page. I'll try to fill in a number pattern here that is not the same pattern. So let's say 555 5555. When I click on submit, it's going to tell me to match the format requested, and the format I have requested is to have 4 numbers. Let's say 1758 a hyphen 786 a hyphen 5432, and then now the pattern is matched, and so you can see that it tries to submit using the default get method, and we're going to look at the methods in another lesson. So this is how you specify using the pattern attributes. You can also use an attribute called the placeholder attribute to let user know what pattern it is. So I want a pattern like 1 2 3 4, and I want 5 6 7 and then 8 9 0 1. So when the users come here, they see the pattern of phone number that should be entered here. So we can use placeholder to give the users a hint about what we want there. Some people design their form so that they have no labels for it. They just put a placeholder within each field that tells the users what should go into the field. We are going to try designing another form using that method. Let me create another form. I'm going to leave this form and create a new form. So I'm just going to take my template and I'll create a new page. And so let me name this form2.html. In this new page, I want to illustrate the other types of input types that we have. And we don't want to do that on the previous form because we want to illustrate further on this form. So I'm going to come here and we're going to look at the form. So I'll create a new form. And then I want to create a new input type. This time, let's say we want to ask the users things like, what is your favorite color? And this label is going to be for color. Now we want to create an input with a type of color. The name is equal to, let's say, fav color, and we'll put the ID to be equal to color. So this is going to have a color picker on the page, and so when I go to my page and I try to open the form 2, I have a color picker where I can select colors on the page. So you test this with different browsers to see how the different colors are displayed. We have another input type, which is the input type range. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste here, and this is going to be a label for, let's say, range, and let's say select a number, and the type of input is going to be range. Let's give it a name, my number, and the ID will be range. Now once you select an input type of range, it's going to give you a slider which is going to choose a number between some ranges which you will specify with the min attribute, and we want it to be between 0 and the max attribute, let's say 100. So the specific number the user selects should be between 0 and 100. So let's refresh our page to see what this looks like. So we have a number slider which selects a number. So whatever the user selects is going to be here. So the default here is 50. So we can look at how we can do this without the min and max attributes and see what displays. So at this point, it's going to have a range without a min and max when the user selects a number. So we don't know exactly what value by looking at it, and that is why you always use those attributes to see exactly what the user have selected. Let us look at another input type called the input type search. So let's say we want to put a search bar. Let's say label for search, and let's say for instance I'm just going to use Google. The type is search, the name is, let's say, search, and the ID is search. So let me break all of this so that we can have every of this on a new line. Save, refresh my page. I have a search bar here. The thing with the search field is like it behaves exactly like a text field, and you won't really see the difference between this and the text field here. There is another input field. We have looked at the input type of date, but there's another input field which is the date time local. So let's say we want to type date time local. So this displays a field where we have a date and the time selector. So let's put date time. Date and time of meeting, and then the name is, let's put date time, and the ID is date time. When I save this, I refresh my web page, I have a date and time selector here where I can select both date and time. So this also depends on your browser support. So always take note that you have to let your users know which browser gives them the best user experience. Let's look at another type, which is the month type. So we've done that which gives us a date selector that has a full day, month, year. If we want only, let's say, the month, so let's say this, select month, and say input type will be month. The name, let's say month, and the ID, let's use month. Save, refresh my page. I have this month selector which only gives me the month to select. We have another input type that we can use to get a part of a date also. So we have dates, we have date time local, we have months. Let's say we want just the time. So I'll change this to time. Select time. Type is time. Name is time. ID is time. Save. Let me break this to start on a new line. Refresh my page, and I have this, which is just a time selector. So these are some of the input types that we have. We are going to continue looking at more input types in the next lesson.